One would always hope that humankind would come together in times of crisis, especially with a common enemy like the Shades threatening them. However, the reality is not so idyllic. Kaine was born in the Aerie, a settlement which overlooks a wide canyon connected by a series of large platforms, bridges, and ladders. Those who live there have chosen such a life mainly due to their desire for isolation and fear of shades, outsiders, and generally the unknown as a whole, which over time warped further into paranoia, superstition, and xenophobia. Kaine was a replicant like the rest of the people residing in the Aerie, and due to genetic error in the centuries-old replication process, she was born intersex. The race of man, while sheep's incredulity, are wolves for conformity. Charles Clinton Van Doren. Merely because she was different from them, the adults in the village shunned her, which was far kinder than how the children treated her. She would regularly have stones thrown at her as she walked through the village, and some would go far as to beat her until she was bloodied and unconscious. Under the constant persecution of the villagers, Kaine fell into intense self-loathing and loneliness. The one light in the young girl's life was her grandmother Kali, a brash woman with great inner strength and kindness, as well as a vocabulary foul enough to send shivers down a watcher's spine. In other words, the spitting image of adult Kaine. Kali was the one who gave Kaine the lunar tears, an entire wreath of the rare flowers. She also wasn't afraid to give any of the villagers a piece of her mind regarding their treatment of her beloved granddaughter, even if it alienated her from them. The two of them were forced to live far from the village, which made life difficult for a young girl and an old woman, but they made do. The daily life of gathering water from the stream, chopping firewood, and journeys into the forest for food occupied their time for many years. Eventually, as Kaine began to grow into a young woman, age began to catch up to her grandmother. Tasks that had once been easy became intense and draining, and her mind slowly slipped away. One day, while Kaine was out gathering stones to build a wall to protect them from the increasingly vicious shades, their house was attacked. Kaine arrived back at home to find a giant shade named Hook had smashed the house down, and Kali was trapped beneath. Faced with an impossible fight, she charged the shade with nothing but a small knife. However, this was in vain, as the knife broke without a scratch left on Hook. The shade tossed Kaine to the side with vicious contempt before going to finish Kali. The last words Kaine heard her grandmother call to her were to run, a plea for her to survive. As she returned to her feet, Kaine uttered a scream so blood-curdling and full of pain that for a moment the shade momentarily stepped backward, gauging the broken girl in front of it hesitantly. Kaine charged the shade once again, trying to stab it with the broken hilt of her knife. Hook sent her flying once more, and this time it was truly over. The blow had smashed her eye, torn her left arm and leg from her, and ruptured something within her to leave her lungs to fill with blood. Naturally, the shade assumed it had killed her and left in pursuit of further prey. But for Kaine, the desire to kill the shade and the desire to live had melded into a fiery, single-minded determination, and she wouldn't be finished so easily. As she slowly slipped away, another shade appeared to her. This shade, named Tyrann, still had a modicum of sanity and attempted to possess her, believing she would be an easy target as she drifted away. However, her will was too strong, and it only possessed her left side, as she was unwilling to surrender to it. Tyrann spoke to her, offering a deal, that he would grant her power, and all he wanted in return was a share in the killing. The more she killed, the more corrupted she would be, and eventually, he could assume full control. Kaine then spent a few aimless years staying on the outskirts of the Aerie. At some point during this time, she met Fyra in the desert and saved her life, but otherwise she mostly stood near her hut, waiting for Hook to return. This is the situation that Nier and Weiss first find her in. During a brief skirmish with Nier, Hook finally returns. The three of them drive off Hook, but Kaine is knocked out, something that is immensely frustrating to her, as someone who has spent so long only able to rely on herself. Hook returns once again shortly after, and attacks the Aerie. Kaine fights Hook and the other shades by herself until Nier and Weiss return to back her up. During her fight with Hook, the shade traps her in a cruel illusion, in which Hook takes the place of her grandmother, But Kainé breaks free, and together, the three of them finally kill Hook and avenge her grandmother at last. Afterward, Kainé reluctantly travels with Nier and Weiss, first to Facade and then later to Emil's manor. In meeting Emil, she develops a camaraderie with the boy, bonding over their perceived cursed nature, his being his eyes that petrify anyone he looks at. Before leaving the manor, Kainé tells him that his eyes are not a sin, parting words that are much more forgiving to him than she has been to herself. After going their separate ways, Kainé meets up with the others again in Nier's village when the Shade Jack attacks. She traps the Shade in the basement, but is unable to lock it inside. As a final resort, she has Emil petrify her to seal the door shut. She would remain this way for several years until Emil was able to free her after becoming the ultimate weapon. After opening her eyes, she still recognized Emil immediately, despite his drastic change in appearance, never doubting that he would return for her. Despite having saved the village, her and Emil are forced to sleep on the outskirts because the villagers find them unsettling. She decided to accompany Nier as he continued his search for YoRHa. Tyrann's presence grew stronger during this time as he taunted and tormented Kainé, threatening to take her over fully, which came to a head when Kainé was impaled by the Shade Gretel in the Lost Shrine during their fight, a wound which normally would have been fatal. However, Tyrann fully took over and healed her before going berserk and being taken down by Nier. Afterward, the group heads to the Shadow Lord's castle, where the game's various endings take place. The first three have no bearing on the following games, so I'll be brief. In A and B, after defeating the Shadow Lord, Nier asks Kainé if she wants to stay with him and YoRHa, but she declines, saying that she has her own business to deal with, and departs. In ending C, after defeating the Shadow Lord, Kainé goes into her Berserk Shade form once again, as she suffers from a Gestalt relapse. After incapacitating her, Tyrann tells Nier that he can either kill her or sacrifice his own existence for hers. Nier chooses to kill her, finally ending her pain. Ending D starts the same as C, but this time Nier chooses to sacrifice himself for Kainé, erasing his entire existence from the world, including any memories anyone has of him, even his very name. Ending E continues following D 3 years later. Kainé finds herself in the Forest of Myth, which by that point was hardly a forest anymore. There, she encountered the AI administrator for Project Gestalt, who was fascinated by her combat abilities, stating that they were far beyond the limits of a replicant. Kainé fought her way deep into the facilities, with the help of Emil, where they found Nier in a new body that had been created using the data from when he'd first visited the forest as a boy. At last, the three of them are reunited, Kainé a little older, Nier a bit younger, and Emil in a strange body, but at the very least, they are together. She was slender, with smooth, white skin. The hint of a dark shadow in her expression highlighted her beautiful features, but something about the sword in her hand didn't seem to fit the picture. Anger, sorrow, hatred. When emotions overwhelmed her, she would swing the sword, so there was never a lack of blood to quench its thirst. The problem was that she couldn't put the sword down, a heart and body in constant conflict. No one in the world could understand her, and loneliness was eating her alive. The long war came to an end, and darkness devoured her. But her heart remained at peace, because she faced fate in the arms of the one she loved. This is the last we see of Kainé directly, but there is some later mention of her in Nier Automata. In the far-flung future, over 8,000 years after Kainé would have passed on, the immortal Emil has lost most of his memories during the Machine War, including those of Kainé, but he does remember that he's a special connection to the flower known as the Lunar Tear. After 2B and 9S help reawaken some of his memories, he recalls a place very dear to him, that being Kainé's shack. When he visits, he says that he spent a lot of time there with the people he loved, tough times and sad times, but that the memories of those times are his greatest and most precious treasure. From this point onward, we delve into some conjecture. Firstly, it is widely theorized that the administrator's fascination with Kainé's combat ability led her to become the basis of the YoRHa androids in Nier Automata, and I think this theory does have merit. First off, at the time Replicant takes place, androids do already exist, as we've seen from the Devla and Popla units. Secondly, it's mentioned in the YoRHa stage play that A2's personality data was based on a girl who had lived on a farm with her grandmother. And while this isn't exactly overly specific, the amount of people who fit this bill who had their combat data collected is surely a much smaller amount. Additionally, the Berserker mode that A2's generation of YoRHa androids have bears a striking resemblance to Kainé's style of fighting, especially in her shade form. However, while still only theories, these are fairly widely accepted by a lot of fans, so I'm not exactly breaking any new ground here. Where this really gets wacky is Kainé's connection to Zero. Kaine is a singularity, the official definition of which is persons, places, or things that can trigger divergence or branch across multiple worlds. Branch phenomena occur when enough magic particles are in an area and all relevant conditions are met. However, a singularity is not recorded as such until after a branch occurs. One of the only other characters who is confirmed to be a singularity, officially anyway, is Zero in Drakengard 3. But their similarities go further than that. Now, their mutual theming around flowers appears, at the moment anyway, to be no deeper than just a visual one. However, it is worth noting that the boss fight with her in Fluorescence, in the Nier raid in Final Fantasy XIV, the boss transforms into a strange hybrid of Kaine and Zero as their respective theme songs play. The similarity I think is especially important here is how both of them are cursed in a way. Zero has the evil flower growing within her, and Kaine has the shade Tyrann. Why this matters is in the definition of what a singularity is. A person that triggers a divergence when there are enough magical particles, aka Maso. So the question becomes, why do Kaine and Zero have enough Maso to trigger a divergence? In Zero's case, the flower is clearly stated to be magical in nature, originating from a magical accident of unseen scale. But what about Kaine? Project Gestalt was carried out using Maso to separate souls from bodies. So these souls, aka Gestalts, aka Shades, are awash in Maso. A powerful shade like Tyrann would probably have a great deal of Maso, and thus so would Kaine. Again, this is just a theory of mine, and not one I've seen anyone else put forth before, so I could be completely mistaken. One place it does seem to fall apart is in Automata, as the paths seem to branch starting with the appearance of A2, but how would an android cause divergence, especially when they seem to have no Maso? Well, Accord from Drakengard 3 is a time-traveling android who seems to travel diverging world lines as she pleases, so it is possible. However, A2 is not exactly an android either. As we find out in Automata, YoRHa units are made using machine cores for their black box, and the machines are created by the aliens and the Red Girls, who, as we've discussed on this channel before, have at least some sort of connection to the Watchers in Drakengard. So maybe the process of making machine cores uses Maso somehow, meaning YoRHa black boxes would as well. The truth is, we just don't know, and maybe we never will. But for now anyway, this concludes the tale of Kaine, the solitary singularity. Hey, just one quick message before we end the video. No, it's not an ad, don't go away. Over the past few months, I've found myself in the unenviable position of needing an organ transplant. I've been lucky enough to find myself living and working in an area that I'm able to get everything lined up much faster than usual, but not everyone is so lucky. So if you are able, I highly encourage you to sign up as a donor. In America, at least, it's just a single checkbox on your ID, so unless you can't do it for religious reasons, I really do encourage it. Bless you all, and see you soon. Happy holidays.